Before we get into this week's episode, I just wanted to invite you to go ahead and subscribe to this podcast. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss any new episodes when they post. And if you want to leave us a review down below, please do so. And now on to this week's episode.
Welcome to Saints in the Parish. This is Father Steve Williams. Join us each week as we reflect on one particular aspect of Catholic teaching and spiritual life. Well, welcome here to another episode of Saints in the Parish. We're happy to have you with us here. And, every week I think to myself, this is a really important subject. I mean, that's an important subject, But I'm going to tell you the thing about this particular subject, the role of the lay faithful, is that this is probably not a subject that you're going to hear at a homily all year long. You're not going to hear this talked about. I'm just guessing. So this is a great opportunity for you as you listen to these podcasts, Saints in the Parish, to hear subjects that are really important in the life of the church, but they don't rise to the importance to have them in the homily like you would the Eucharist or the Trinity or Mary or many of the other things that we've talked about. So this is an important part of that puzzle, and you need all the parts. We need all the parts moving that we possibly can. So the laity is a very, very important role, and so we want to use some church documents. Of course, Lumen Gentium is one of the big documents in Vatican II, and we'll talk a little bit about Vatican II and how important that was. The fact that we found ourselves in the church, in the life of the church, where we needed some change. I mean, that's just all it is to it. I mean, we are constantly changing, and if we're not changing, then we're dying. So we have to come to that realization. Now, it probably meant more for some, and it may have meant less for others, but we're just talking about how important it means in your life and in the life of the whole church. So we want to just really talk about Lumen Gentium. You can even tell us what Lumen Gentium means, and then we'll get to the other document that's really important too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in Vatican II, there's four, we would say, like the principal documents, which are the constitutions is what they call them. So Lumen Gentium, Gaudium et Spes, you have Sacrosanctum Concilium, which is the big one on the liturgy, and then you have Dei Verbum, which is on Scripture, Revelation. So those are the four big ones. Right. But there's another 600 pages of volumes of other documents that were written, which are what they would call decrees. So they're kind of small. They're, ad gentes. There's 17 of them maybe. And one of them particularly is on the role of the lay apostolate, which we'll talk about. But that document is called Apostolicum Actuositatem. And
now, you have to repeat that like 4 or 5 times in a row. No, I'm just kidding. This is, again, not something that you're going to hear from the pulpit.
Right.
I mean, so this is great that we're talking about it.
Also wanted to add to, all these fancy names of the documents. It's really... Particularly, it's taken from the first line of the document.
Right.
It's important to know the name, but the name doesn't always necessarily mean what the document's about, because it's literally just the first, usually 2 words of the document.
And of course, they write all the documents in Latin. It's the universal language of the church, because then it gets translated into 200 different languages later. Mm-hmm. So for us, of course, it's translated into English. But the most important thing is that we really try and understand what they're talking about. And didn't we just celebrate the 50th anniversary of Vatican II? I think we did. Not too long ago, we celebrated the 50th anniversary.
In the 60s.
Yeah,
so
it ended in 65. I'm not going to say that. But anyway, it ended in 65. So I think in 2025 we celebrated the 50th anniversary, or the 55th whatever anniversary of that. So
it's been less than a century.
Yeah, it's been less than a century. So still, definitely still trying to let it absorb in the life of the church, and this is very important. I think it's also equally important for us to realize, and when I say this, I really almost know that I'm going to offend someone, but it's not enough just to go to church. It's not enough for us to go to Mass, although that is extremely important. We've talked a lot about that. Your participation in Mass has so much value. It's so important. It's the source and summit. But then from that, we take what we've been given and we do something with it. Well, what are you going to do with it? And that's why this is so vitally important. That's the reason why we want to talk about the role of the laity.
Yeah, and I think too, before we kind of go into the documents, I think some like historical context is valuable. So, in the first, 1500, 1800 years of the church, not that everything was all, sunshine and rainbows, but, the culture as a whole was much more Christian. So like you really had an abundance of vocations, like the priest, there were even 100 years ago, there's 4 or 5 priests at every parish. I mean, they're everywhere. The nuns are all running the Catholic schools, and, you have this really abundant Christian culture. So Vatican II is kind of in that, the sexual revolution's going on, and like the culture is rapidly changing. So it's trying to respond to that, which is why we see now, some parishes don't even have a priest. The priest actually travels. We have, I can think of a number of priests in this archdiocese that they're assigned to 4 parishes. So the landscape is very different. So the role of the laity now is more important, I think, than it has been in the past because of the landscape we find the church in. And I know you and I were talking the other day about, my job at the parish, so-and-so's job at the parish. And, I think it's really important because we offer resources to the parish. My skill set is particular for this thing, or the next person and the next person. But there are some things that you can do that I can't do. Like I can't celebrate the sacraments. Right. I can't celebrate Mass. I can't hear confessions. I can't go to the hospital and anoint somebody. And that's perfect. So the roles that I can do that you can delegate to me helps you fulfill the task that the Lord has given to you.
Yeah, I mean, even you could take something like music ministry. I mean, there are some priests that are musically inept, hello. And so I rely on a lot of music ministers to make the liturgy beautiful. I mean, youth ministry, there's, if we think about, the image I like to think about is, if you play sport, if your child plays sports or your grandchildren play sports, you want a football coach. You don't want them just out there by themselves. They need a coach. And they need to learn how to hit correctly and catch correctly and throw correctly. Or basketball, you can use whatever image you want to use, but you make sure that they have a coach. Well, is that not true with youth ministry too? Do they not need a quote-unquote coach in their life? And so we hire youth ministers. Sometimes they're volunteers. Sometimes we hire them. Sometimes they're a little more specialized. They may actually have a degree in youth ministry, which now the church offers at various colleges. So those things are very important. And it's not that I don't want to do some of the things. Like I certainly enjoy doing a lot of these things, but it's a question of, in my life, it's a question of priority. Right. Someone needs to be anointed at the hospital. Okay. Someone, their family calls and they may be dying. Okay. There's a funeral. I mean, like to console the family of the bereaved is vitally important. I mean, that takes, it takes priority over sometimes even what I had planned, like the day will come that actually I think it's going to come sooner than later that you'll see just Donald Paul here because something else came up, so you'll just see him with a guest as the host because something has arisen that I need to take care of. That's just the reality of the landscape of the church. And I think this document acknowledges that. They could see this coming in the future. And one of the things that I like to harp on is that the church is trying to make the faith more relevant in people's lives. So you mentioned the sexual revolution. Let's just talk about secularization as a whole. I mean, what's happening is the faith is less important today in the vast majority of people's lives as it was, say 25, 50 years ago. And I mean, it can be anything from, taking the nativity set out of the town square, removing the 10 Commandments, you see no crosses, no crucifixes. I mean, no prayer in schools. I mean, the list goes on of how we have become more secular. So as a result of that, the church is kind of saying, you need to step up. And so there's a group of people like yourself that are actually working for the church. And that's a small minority of people, but a very important minority. As a matter of fact, Donald Paul, when we have a staff meeting, people work for me, I remind them that the number one most important thing about working for the church is their own personal holiness. That's number one. I don't care what you're doing. If it's not contributing to your holiness, then it's not as healthy as it possibly can be. You can be the best youth minister in the whole world, and best music minister in the church. And if your holiness is not number one, then you're not as healthy as you possibly can be. And we recognize this world today can be very unhealthy. And we're trying to be very healthy, and we're trying to help others. We're trying to bring others along with us. So the more you pray about this, the more you, in a sense, study it. So let's just say you watch this particular podcast, you spend 30 minutes, this is contributing to your understanding of the bigger vision of the church and what the church would like to accomplish.
Right. And this is actually a perfect segue into the next phase of this. So this is a quote taken from Lumen Gentium. So if you're have the document or you want to look it up, this is in paragraph 31 of Lumen Gentium. It says, they being the laity, so the laity being, all of those people that are not ordained ministers. So apart from the priests and the religious, everyone else is the laity, according to the church. So the laity live in the ordinary circumstances of life and social life, so in their families, from which the very web of their existence is woven. They are called there by God, that by exercising their proper function and led by the Spirit of the gospel, they may work for the sanctification of the world from within as a leaven. I particularly like this quote because it really summarizes the entire force of the church's pushing of the laity, which is the laity are specifically active in the church to bring the world the sanctification that the church offers through Christ. And if you think about it, what we were talking about earlier, you have, if you're not here, it's because you're doing something, you're anointing somebody, you're celebrating a funeral, you're whatever it is, and you're doing that specifically, but you can't be out into the world all the time and, going in, Google's headquarters because, so-and-so needs to be, talked the gospel to. But if I work at Google, that's my role. Like, that's what I'm supposed to do. Like, you can't be everywhere, but the laity are everywhere, right? So, and you talked about personal holiness, and you can't give what you don't have. So if you receive your own personal holiness, if you're growing in that, you can then give that in the specific area that you find yourself in. And it can be anywhere, the grocery store, your job, your family, your remember sports teams, wherever it is.
St. John Paul, the great, would have meetings with Mother Teresa. And I remember one time he was lamenting to her that he really would like to go with her sometime when she's picking up this dying person and bringing him back to care for him. Mm-hmm. Like he really would like to spend more of his time doing those kind of things, but he couldn't. Mm-hmm. Number one, it would be a lot of fanfare around, so
right.
he couldn't. But she could do that, and so they were just reminding us of the different roles that different people have in the life of the church and how important all the different roles are.
Yeah. And in 2 paragraphs from that, in paragraph 33, it says, talking about the lay apostolate. So when we talk about apostolate, it can mean a lot of different things, but it's role, job. Those are kind of what I would say is synonyms of what the church is calling the apostolate. And that apostolate, which is specific to you, so wherever you find yourself, it's a participation in the salvific mission of the church itself. What that means, very simply, is you in your specific area of your life, wherever you find yourself, you are participating in the salvation that the church is trying to offer the world, that Jesus Christ won on the cross. Because you will be the one that lets them hear about, like, Jesus, right? They're probably not coming to Mass to hear it from the priest, or the liturgy itself, right? They're in their specific area, and you are called to bring that news to them, because you are a privileged position because of your job or your family or wherever you find yourself.
And I think about just a couple of people come to mind when you say that. Mm-hmm. I think about a couple of people that come to mind. This young man is in public high school, and I think everyone, probably all of his friends, realize that he's Catholic, and so anyway, he gets in a conversation with another guy, I don't know, sophomore, junior year, and he said, "Oh yeah, I kind of grew up in the Catholic Church, but I don't really go to church anymore." And he's like, "Well, why not?" Mm-hmm. And the guy says, I don't know, our family just kind of quit going to church. And he said, "Well, come on and go to the youth group with me, or come on and go to church with me." He literally invited him to go to church with him. I mean, I know today that doesn't sound like really Catholic. It sounds a little more, but he did, and he liked it. As a result of that, that young man, got confirmed, joined the church, and completes confirmation, and his whole family came back to church. Right. And I'm thinking, okay, he didn't do anything extraordinary. Right. He had a conversation, and he just happened to run into someone who was, in that phase of their life where, right, other things took more priority. But, he did kind of joggle their faith, their souls, mm-hmm, a little, to say that this is important to us. And so as a result, several people came back to the church, and I see them at Mass all the time. And we just kind of, we just kind of talk about the young man who's really done that for a few people. He's now in college, and he's actually, that young man is praying and discerning about a vocation. So isn't that a wonderful idea?
Yeah. And, that's the commission that the church gives to each of us, right? We are called to be a light in the world wherever we are, and if you're in high school, in a public high school, or even in a Catholic high school or private, you're called to bring the light of Christ to everyone around you. And that sometimes looks like, offering a helping hand or showing compassion and love, in certain circumstances, or like you just mentioned, it could be a specific, ask, hey, come to church with me, hey, come to youth group. And that can be the catalyst for, conversion. And that's, I think, a perfect example of that's the laity's role in the church. When
I say the laity participate in Christ's priesthood, alarms probably go off. You probably go, wait a second, hold it. Well, like you mentioned before, there's the ordained ministerial priesthood, and then there's the priesthood, the generic priesthood of Jesus Christ. And that we participate in that just by our baptisms. So everyone that's baptized participates in the priesthood of Jesus Christ. And so we have to understand that, that by our participating, we're offering your lives, your family, your endeavors, your spiritual worship of God, your participation at Mass. Again, we say, how important is that? And that's, maybe it's important for you, but it's also, your participation is important for a lot of other people too. So again, as we're reminded, again in Lumen Gentium, we're reminded how important this is to us in our lives. I will be honest, we don't want to take, when you think about our society puts a lot of money on wealth because of the secularization of the world. Well, I'm happy that there are some really wealthy Catholics, Christians, religious people, not just because they're generous, but because I believe that their wealth will be properly used. It won't be used kind of what I might call just in a self-centered way, in which a lot of the wealth in the world is used or misused. Let's use the resources. Let's use what we've been given by God to really do good things.
Yeah, and again, if you are following along this, the mind of the church, in this document specifically, then your personal holiness is what contributes to that. If you are really imbued with the sanctification that the church and Jesus are offering to us individually, then you will manage, those earthly goods appropriately. Yes, of course, like giving to the church, but also like helping others, like helping, those in your community that you see, and being generous with the gifts that you have been given. But that starts with, your participation in Mass, your growth in holiness, which then you can give to the world in your specific area. Whether you're wealthy or not wealthy, you can give abundantly in different ways.
Your prayer life.
Right.
It's amazing that your prayer life has an effect on other people. And that's the reason why we're reminded to encourage people to go out and to go on a retreat, or to, join a Bible study, or to, read something religious to help you grow in your spiritual life.
Yeah, and again, in the second document, Apostolicum Actuositatem, it mentions that specifically because it says that faith, hope, and love are necessary components in the life of the laity. And again, if you are not living in those virtues of faith, hope, and love, you can't give what the church is asking you to give to the world. You have to first take those to heart and really grow in those virtues, so that you can love effectively. You can be a sign of hope to the world, and that your faith will, be able to be given appropriately. Like you said, with that student in high school, clearly he had taken that to heart, and he was living in a way that was really compelling to that family and, to all those around him.
Let's talk a little bit about recognizing Christ in others and allowing others to recognize Christ in us. Mm-hmm. How does that play a part in this particular document as it pertains to, again, we're going to say apostolate, but we might also say, where we're living. Mm-hmm. We might just say our families, our work, our social setting. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, how does that play a part of recognizing Christ in others and allowing others to recognize Christ in us?
Yeah. So, if we don't recognize Christ in others, if we don't recognize their dignity, then we will not treat them accordingly, right? So I think, again, it first starts with yourself. So do you recognize that you have been created in God's image? Do you recognize that you are, you should have the Holy Spirit residing within you, that really animates and informs your decisions? So first, that's the first step, right? So growing in holiness, growing in your prayer life, attending Mass, doing the things you need to do.
And I don't think there's a lot of people that are going to watch this particular podcast that are totally disinterested in that. They're not, right. They're not interested in, letting other people see Christ in them, or even seeing Christ in other people. So, here's where the mission of the saints in the parish,
yep,
plays a part. It's the ripple effect. You throw the little stone in the pond and you see these ripples occurring on the water. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that's where you and I play a big part in helping other people see this in their lives. So take advantage of getting in a conversation one day at a particular party. Don't worry too much about, offending them. I mean, I think that we sometimes worry so much about offending others, that we just choose to not talk about faith or religion or anything like that. Well, I say let's take advantage of that. I also find this is much, much easier sometimes one-on-one. I say, well, when you see someone that you think that really needs the love of Jesus, and let's get down to that level, okay, that need the love of Jesus, then you say, hey, what are you doing tomorrow night? What are you doing? You want to get coffee? And you have this conversation with them, and I might say, see how much traction there is. Because, they could get totally turned off and you could say, okay, fine. I care about you. And that's the only reason why I made an effort. But if there's some traction there, they'll get in a conversation. I know, particularly young people as it pertains to me and evangelization and helping them be well-formed. I say, do you have any questions? I'll let them ask questions, and because the church has a lot of answers. So you start asking these questions, and a lot of times they'll put them in the sense that, they'll say, well, we have a lot of doubts. Mm-hmm. And I always say, no, you have a lot of questions. Because when you have a doubt, that means you're not interested in listening to the answer. But if you have a question, then that means you are willing to listen to an answer. I mean, keep in mind that we're all sinful. We're all sinners. So when I say I have an answer, that's not saying that I'm any better than you are. It takes a lot of humility for us to be good evangelists. But it's all in the name of Jesus.
Yeah, and again, it's when you authentically love the person you're talking to, again, that's seeing Christ in them, and your personal holiness has a lot to play with their response to you. If they look at you and they see, somebody who's not living the way they're talking about, or who is, I guess you could say a little hypocritical with, if they're saying, oh, do this, don't do this, but they're doing the opposite, that's going to have a major role. So it goes into, are you living the way you're supposed to? And if you are, then your life should shine forth and be very influential in their life.
And you'll find a certain peacefulness in your life, which aren't we all looking for that peacefulness in our life? Unfortunately, this is a pretty broad subject, and here's something that I think we should do because of this is such kind of a broad subject. We're going to look forward to a lot of your questions in the comment section below. So ask some questions, and then we're going to come back with a part 2 in the future about this particular subject. And a lot of that part 2 will be based on some of the questions you may have about Lumen Gentium, about the other documents, about Vatican II. Just ask us hit review and ask us some questions. We kind of have to draw this to a close because we ran out of time, but want to tell you that we really appreciate all of your comments. We appreciate you watching this, and we appreciate your faithfulness.
And as always, please like the video, subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube specifically, subscribe to the channel. Download the episodes on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. It really helps get this out to as many people as possible. And again, we're praying for you. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode.
God bless you.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Saints in the Parish Podcast. Please like, share, and leave a review, as well as subscribe to the YouTube channel as we all seek to become saints in the parish. God bless.